Welcome to the deep dive. Ever feel like your decisions are a little predictable sometimes?
Yeah.
Like you always seem to reach for that extra cookie or maybe put off saving for retirement until later.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Today, we're diving headfirst into why we make the choices we do and how some surprisingly small changes, they call them nudges, can steer us toward better outcomes, in our health, wealth, happiness, all that stuff.
Right? Think about it.
Yeah.
Why is the fruit suddenly at eye level in the grocery store?
Could that be a nudge? Yeah, let's find out.
Exactly. And this isn't just, theoretical musing. We're really digging into the book Nudge, improving decisions about health, wealth, and happiness.
Okay.
And the core idea, like the authors lay out, is that we humans, well, we aren't always the perfectly rational beings we sometimes think we are.
Definitely not.
Understanding these very human quirks, our biases, our tendencies, that can actually give you a real advantage.
How so?
Well, both in making your own choices better and also in kind of understanding why the world around you is set up the way it is.
Okay, that makes sense. So, whether you're trying to, say, stick to a budget or eat a bit healthier, maybe just figure out why certain options are presented to you in a particular way. This deep dive is tailored for you.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission today is basically to pull out the most useful, like immediately applicable insights from Nudge. What can you start doing differently after listening to this? That's what we're aiming for.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's unpack this fundamental idea first that we aren't always perfectly rational. Where does the book start with that?
Right. So the book kicks off by just tackling that assumption head on, this idea of perfect rationality.
Yeah.
The authors state pretty bluntly, actually, that the assumption that people always make choices in their own best interest is, well, obviously false.
Obviously false.
And if you just think about your own life for a second, I bet you can find examples where you did something that, looking back, maybe wasn't the smartest move, right?
Oh, absolutely. Plenty of those. It's like the book uses this analogy of a chess beginner versus a grandmaster.
Yeah, I like that one.
The novice makes moves that are clearly, not great. And in so many areas of life, like investing or healthcare choices or even picking insurance, we're often the novices.
Mm-hmm.
We're navigating this landscape that's been shaped by experts, by pros in those fields. Their understanding of the game, it's just different.
Totally. And what's really interesting is why some decisions are easier than others.
Hmm.
The quality of the choices you make, it really hinges on a few key things. Your experience, the information you actually have, and crucially, the feedback you get.
Okay, explain that.
Well, think about choosing an ice cream flavor.
Hmm.
Most of us have lots of experience, right? We know what we like.
Yeah.
The information, the flavor name, maybe what it looks like is pretty clear, and the feedback. It's immediate and delicious. Or maybe not, but you know right away.
Right. Instant feedback.
But compare that to, say, consistently choosing fruit over ice cream for health reasons. The long-term benefits, the feedback, it's way delayed. It's not as obvious or immediate.
Make it harder to stick with the good choice.
Exactly. Or think about really complex medical treatments. Most of us lack direct experience. The information can be super technical and confusing.
Overwhelming, yeah.
And the feedback on whether you made the best choice might not be clear for years, if ever.
Yeah.
You ever felt just swamped trying to understand medical options?
Oh, for sure. You leave the doctor's office sometimes with more questions than answers. It really drives home how the way those choices are presented matters so much.
That's the choice architecture the book talks about.
Right. Choice architecture.
And this leads to a really key insight.
Hmm.
The authors argue it's basically impossible not to influence people's choices.
That's so.
Because in almost any situation where options are offered, someone, somewhere, has to decide how to present them. What's the order? What's highlighted? What's the default?
Ah, okay.
And that design, whether the designer intended it or not, inherently nudges people one way or another.
So even doing nothing is still a design choice.
Pretty much. Think about that cafeteria example from the book Carolyn's Cafeterias.
Yeah, where she just rearranged the food.
Exactly. She put the healthier stuff, fruits, salads at eye level, made it easier to grab, didn't ban anything unhealthy.
And people started eating better.
Significantly better,
Yeah.
just by changing the layout. That was a nudge towards health. No mandate, just a gentle push.
Shows how subtle it can be.
Totally. And sometimes these nudges are completely unintentional. The book mentions paycheck frequency, which is kind of fascinating.
Paychecks, how does that nudge you?
Well, apparently, people tend to save a bit more if they get paid bi-weekly compared to monthly.
Why?
Because those 2 months a year when you get 3 paychecks instead of 2, people often treat that third one like a little windfall.
Oh, like extra money.
Yeah. So they're slightly more inclined to save some of it. It's
Yeah.
like an accidental nudge towards saving, just based on the pay schedule. Has your pay cycle ever felt like it influenced your spending or saving?
I never consciously thought about it that way, but yeah, maybe. Those 3 paycheck months do feel a bit different. It really makes you start looking at everything differently, doesn't it?
It does.
Like online shopping interfaces or how your work cafeteria is set up.
Hmm.
How is the design subtly shaping what you end up choosing?
Exactly. And to really grasp why these subtle things work so well, we need to talk about the two thinking systems the book describes.
Okay, the two systems.
Yeah, the automatic system and the reflective system.
Right. Automatic is fast, gut reaction.
Yep, intuitive, effortless, like ducking when something flies at your head. The reflective system is the slower, more deliberate, conscious thought process,
Mm-hmm.
analyzing pros and cons, doing math problems,
Yeah.
that stuff.
So automatic is like that jolt of fear if the plane hits turbulence
Uh-huh.
before your reflective brain kicks in and goes, okay, statistically, flying is very safe.
Perfect example. And the book argues we often get into trouble because we rely too heavily on that fast automatic system, especially when we lack experience or the stakes are high or the choices are complex.
We jump to conclusions.
Often, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, an interesting point they make is that practice can actually shift tasks from the slow reflective system to the fast automatic one.
Like learning to drive. At first, it takes intense concentration.
Exactly. Every little action is deliberate. But after years, you can often drive almost automatically while thinking about other things. Or think about expert athletes. Their moves become ingrained, automatic.
Okay, so the automatic system isn't always bad.
Not at all. It's essential. But for many decisions, especially important or unfamiliar ones, our gut can lead us wrong. Remember those cognitive reflection test questions?
Oh man, those were tricky. The bat and ball cost $1.10. The dat costs $1 more than the ball.
How much does the ball cost? And the immediate answer that jumps out is
10 cents.
right, which feels right, but it's wrong.
Yeah, because if the ball is 10 cents, the bat is $1.10, and that adds up to $1.20.
Exactly. The correct answer is 5 cents. But your automatic system jumps on the easy, intuitive answer. You have to engage the reflective system to check the math.
And the widget machine one and the lily pads doubling, same idea. Our first guess is often wrong.
Yep. It highlights that difference between what the book calls humans, who often go with their gut, and econs, the perfectly rational beings of economic theory who always use their reflective system.
So we're more Homer Simpson than Mr. Spock.
Most of the time, yeah.
Mm.
Can you think of a time you made a quick decision based on intuition that turned out to be wrong once you actually thought about it?
Oh, daily. Probably multiple times daily.
So these mental shortcuts, these rules of thumb our automatic system uses, are called heuristics. They're usually helpful, but they can lead to predictable errors or biases.
Okay, let's talk about some of those biases.
Cool. One big one is anchoring and adjustment.
Anchoring, like a ship's anchor.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
We tend to latch on to the first piece of information, we get the anchor, and then we adjust our estimates or judgments from there. The problem is we often don't adjust enough.
Give me an example.
Okay, the book uses guessing the population of Milwaukee. If I first ask you about Chicago's population, which is huge, your guess for Milwaukee will likely be anchored higher than if I first asked you about, say, Green Bay's population, which is much smaller.
Even though Chicago's size isn't directly relevant to Milwaukee.
Exactly. But the real kicker is that even completely irrelevant numbers can act as anchors.
No way!
Yes way. They did this wild experiment where they asked students to estimate when Attila the Hun sacked Europe. But first, they had them write down the last 3 digits of their phone number, add 200, and write that down.
Okay.
Students whose phone number anchor was high gave significantly later dates for Attila the Hun than students whose anchor number was low.
That's crazy. The phone number has absolutely nothing to do with Attila the Hun.
Nothing. But it still anchored their subsequent judgment. So think about how this might affect you. Maybe you see an initial high price for a product, and even if it gets discounted, that first anchor makes the sale price seem better than it might objectively be.
Wow. Okay, what's another bias?
Representativeness. This is where we judge how likely something is based on how well it seems to match a particular prototype or stereotype in our minds, even if statistics suggest otherwise.
Like judging a book by its cover.
Sort of, yeah. Or think about the example of the bombing map of London during WWII. People saw clusters of bomb hits on the map and naturally assumed the Germans were deliberately targeting those specific spots.
Made sense, right? Look for the pattern.
But analysis later showed the distribution was essentially random. Our brains are wired to see patterns, even in randomness. We think things that look representative of a pattern must be caused by something specific.
So, like, if a few people in a neighborhood get cancer, people immediately look for a local cause, a cancer cluster, even if statistically some clusters are bound to happen randomly in a large population.
Precisely. We overestimate the meaning of small samples or apparent patterns. Have you ever maybe jumped to a conclusion about someone based on how they looked or talked, assuming they fit a certain mold?
Yeah, probably
Uh-huh.
more often than I'd like to admit. It's a mental shortcut, I guess.
It is. Another really common one is the optimism bias. We tend to be unrealistically optimistic about our own abilities and futures.
Like thinking we're better than average drivers.
Exactly. Or the book mentions students estimating their class rank. Something like 90% expect to finish in the top half, which is mathematically impossible. Less than 5% typically expect to be below the median.
We all think we're special.
We do. And while a little optimism is healthy, unrealistic optimism can lead you to take unnecessary risks or maybe undersave for retirement because you just assume things will work out fine later on.
That hits a bit close to home.
And then there's a really big one, loss aversion.
Loss aversion. Okay, what's that?
Basically, the pain we feel from losing something is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure we feel from gaining something of equal value.
Losing hurts more than winning feels good.
Exactly. The classic experiment is with coffee mugs. They gave mugs to half the students in a class. Then they asked the mug owners how much money they demand to sell their mug. And they asked the students without mugs how much they'd be willing to pay to buy one. The owners typically demanded about twice as much to give up their mug as the non-owners were willing to pay to get one.
Wow. Just because they owned it for a few minutes.
Yep. Once it feels like yours, the thought of losing it looms larger. Think about a gamble. Would you take a bet with a 50-50 chance of winning, say, $150 versus losing $100?
Probably not. Losing $100 feels worse than winning $150 feels good.
Most people wouldn't. You'd probably need the potential win to be much higher, maybe $200 or more, to compensate for the potential pain of that $100 loss. That's loss aversion.
So how does this affect us day to day?
Well, it leads to inertia, a strong bias towards sticking with what you already have because giving it up feels like a loss.
The status quo bias.
Exactly. They did another experiment where they gave some people mugs and others chocolate bars of roughly equal value. Then they offered them the chance to trade.
Okay.
You'd expect about half the people to trade, right, depending on their preference. But only about 1 in 10 actually switched. People didn't want to give up the thing they initially received.
So you might stick with your current phone plan or your bank or even investments that aren't doing great just because the thought of switching and potentially losing what you have feels uncomfortable.
That's a very common effect of loss aversion, yeah. It can prevent you from making beneficial changes. Have you ever held on to, say, clothes you never wear just because you can't bring yourself to get rid of them? That might be loss aversion, too.
Guilty as charged. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. The book also talks about mindless choosing.
Yes, the cashew
The
problem.
cashew problem.
Yeah, Thaler tells this story about hosting a dinner party. He put out a big bowl of cashews while people were waiting for dinner, and everyone kept munching on them, even though dinner was coming soon and the cashews weren't even that good.
They were just there.
Exactly. They were mindlessly eating them just because the bowl was right in front of them. He eventually realized he had to take the bowl away to stop people from spoiling their appetite.
So we just go on autopilot sometimes.
Totally. You ever drive your usual route to work on a Saturday morning when you actually meant to go somewhere else entirely?
Yes. More than once.
Or get sucked into scrolling social media, planning to check just one thing, and then suddenly an hour is gone?
Also, yes?
That's automatic pilot. We perform actions without really paying attention. And the book argues eating is often like that. People eat what's put in front of them, often without really tasting it or considering if they're hungry. How many times have you finished a whole bag of chips while watching TV and barely registered eating them?
Too many times.
And this kind of mindless choosing often links up with self-control problems. We know we shouldn't smoke or we should save more or eat less junk food. But in the moment, the immediate temptation or the path of least resistance wins out.
The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Pretty much. And the consequences are real. The book cites stats like the overwhelming majority of smokers saying they want to quit, or the high rates of obesity, nearly 2/3 of Americans being overweight or obese at the time of writing. There's often a big gap between what our reflective system wants long-term and what our automatic system chooses right now.
So, are there areas in your life where you find yourself acting mindlessly or struggling with self-control, even when you know the long-term downsides?
I think most of us can identify some area, yeah.
So, what can we do? The book must offer some solutions, right? Some tools.
Absolutely. It talks about several tools for change, basically. Ways to use nudges to help ourselves bridge that gap between intentions and actions. One powerful tool is using commitment devices.
Commitment devices, like locking yourself into something.
Sort of, yeah. It's where you voluntarily restrict your future choices or create consequences for yourself to help you stick to a goal.
Okay, like what?
Thaler tells another great story about a friend who desperately wanted to lose weight but kept failing. So the friend wrote Thaler a series of post-dated checks.
Okay.
If the friend didn't meet his agreed-upon weight loss targets by certain dates, Thaler was instructed to cash the check and donate the money to a cause the friend hated.
Ooh, clever. Using loss aversion against yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The pain of that potential loss, his money going to an organization he despised, was a much stronger motivator than just the vague desire to lose weight. Have you ever tried something like that? Maybe telling a friend your goal to make yourself more accountable, or setting up automatic transfers to savings right after payday.
Yeah, that accountability thing definitely helps. The book also mentions stick.com,
Right.
a website where you can actually set up these kinds of commitments with real financial stakes.
It does, yeah. People use it for weight loss, smoking cessation, finishing projects, all sorts of goals. You put money on the line, designate a referee, and choose where the money goes if you fail. Maybe charity, maybe an anti-charity.
That's intense. Another tool mentioned is mental accounting, right? How does that work?
Yeah, mental accounting is the idea that we treat money differently depending on where it came from or what we intend to use it for. We put money into different mental buckets.
Like the house money effect in a casino?
hmm
People gamble more recklessly with money they've won?
Exactly. Even though rationally a dollar's a dollar, right? But we don't treat it that way. We might have a vacation fund bucket, rainy day bucket, a bill-paying bucket.
And this can lead to weird behaviors.
It can lead to some pretty illogical financial decisions. The book cites research showing many households have, like, thousands in savings accounts earning almost no interest while simultaneously carrying high-interest credit card debt.
That makes no sense financially. You should use the savings to pay off the expensive debt.
Logically, yes.
Yeah.
But because the savings are in the emergency fund mental account and the credit card debt is in the spending account, people don't connect them. They keep them separate. Have you ever treated, say, a tax refund or a bonus differently than your regular salary? Splurged with it when you wouldn't normally?
Maybe. It does feel like found money sometimes. It's definitely something to think about. Are your mental accounts preventing you from making the best overall financial choices?
It's a good question to ask yourself. Now, another huge influence the book discusses is social influence.
How other people affect our choices.
Immensely. We're fundamentally social creatures. We look to others for cues on how to behave, what's normal, what's acceptable. Conformity is a powerful force.
Though the book does debunk the myth about lemmings committing mass suicide, right?
Yes, thankfully. That was apparently fate for a Disney documentary. But the general principle holds we are strongly influenced by what others do. Think about how easily yawning spreads,
We're smiling.
or fashion trends, or even stock market bubbles. They mention a cool experiment with music downloads.
What happened?
They created a website where people could listen to and download songs by unknown bands. In one version, people just saw the songs. In another, they saw how many times each song had already been downloaded by others.
Adding a social cue.
Exactly. And what happened? In the social influence worlds, the popular songs became much more popular, and the unpopular ones even less so. Small early differences in downloads got magnified purely because people tended to download what others were already downloading. Popularity became somewhat arbitrary and self-reinforcing.
So hits are partly just created by people seeing that other people like them.
To a large extent, yeah. And sometimes this social influence is unintentional. Think about how much you eat when you're dining with others compared to when you're alone.
Probably more when I'm with others.
Studies show most people do eat significantly more when eating in groups. We unconsciously mirror our companions' eating pace and quantity. It's an unintentional social nudge.
Okay, so how can we use this understanding of social influence productively?
Well, framing matters hugely. Remember the Petrified Forest National Park study?
With the signs about stealing wood?
Yeah. One sign said something like, "Many past visitors have removed petrified wood, damaging the park." What do you think that sign did?
Uh-oh. Probably made people think, oh, Lots of people do it, so it must be okay.
Bingo. It actually increased theft because it normalized the bad behavior. It inadvertently signaled that stealing wood was common,
So what worked better?
a sign that focused on protecting the park and framed the theft negatively, like, please don't remove the petrified wood in order to preserve the natural state of the park. Or even better, a sign emphasizing the positive norm. The vast majority of past visitors have left the petrified wood in the park, helping to preserve its natural beauty.
Highlighting what most people do right, not what some people do wrong.
Exactly. Focus on the desirable norm.
Hmm.
So thinking about your own life, how might the habits or stated norms of your friends, family, or colleagues be influencing your choices, maybe in areas like diet, exercise, spending, or even environmental actions?
That's a really good question to reflect on. Okay, so we understand some biases and influences. How do we actually design better choices? The book talks about choice architecture principles.
Yeah.
Yes.
Principles for designing environments or systems that make it easier for people, including yourself, to make better choices.
What's the first one?
Probably the most powerful one.
Defaults. Defaults. What happens if you do nothing?
Exactly. Because people often stick with the default option due to inertia, loss aversion, or just simple convenience. Setting a good default is incredibly effective. Think about retirement plan enrollment.
Right. If you have to actively sign up, opt in, participation is often low.
But if you're automatically enrolled unless you actively choose to opt out,
Participation rates shoot way up.
dramatically.
Yeah.
Because the default is now saving for retirement. It makes the good choice the easy choice. Have you noticed defaults in software settings, subscription renewals, or other areas, and how they influence what you ended up doing?
Oh, yeah. You often just stick with whatever is pre-selected.
Another key principle is expect error.
Assume people will mess up.
Basically, yeah. Humans make predictable mistakes. Good design anticipates these errors and tries to make the system forgiving.
Like what?
Think about the Paris Metro ticket that works no matter which way you insert it. Or gas pump nozzles being different sizes so you can't easily put diesel in a gasoline car.
Mm-hmm.
Or even simple things like Gmail prompting, did you forget your attachment? If you mention attachment in the email, but don't attach anything,
Those are lifesavers sometimes. They prevent dumb mistakes.
they nudge you away from error. Good systems are designed with human fallibility in mind. How could you maybe design something in your own workflow to be more forgiving of potential errors?
Good thought. What else?
Provide feedback. People need to know if they're doing well or poorly, or how their actions relate to their goals.
Like the fuel efficiency display in a car.
Perfect example. That immediate feedback on your gas mileage can nudge you towards driving more efficiently. Or even the fake shutter click sound on a digital camera. It provides feedback that you actually took the picture. Low battery warnings on laptops are crucial feedback.
But not too much feedback, right? Warning fatigue is real.
True, the feedback needs to be timely, relevant, and clear. Too many flashing lights and beeps can just be overwhelming noise.
Okay. Defaults, expect error, provide feedback. What's next?
Understand mappings. This is about the relationship between the choice you make and the ultimate outcome, or welfare. How easy is it for someone to map their choice onto what it actually means for them?
Explain mapping.
Okay, choosing an ice cream flavor has easy mapping. You choose chocolate, you get chocolatey taste. The link is direct and understandable.
Right.
But choosing between digital cameras based purely on megapixels, that's hard mapping for most people. What does 12 megapixels versus 20 megapixels actually mean for the photos you want to take or print?
Yeah, it's not intuitive.
A better mapping would be if the camera specs were framed in terms of, say, prints high-quality photos up to size X or good for viewing on large TVs. That maps the technical spec to a relatable outcome.
Or choosing a mortgage. The mapping between interest rates, points, fees, and your total long-term cost is really complex.
Extremely complex. Making those mappings clear, helping you translate the choice into what it means for your wallet or your health, is a key goal of good choice architecture.
Okay, and the last principle.
Structure. Complex choices. Many important decisions, healthcare plans, retirement investments, college choices, involve many options and complex trade-offs. Simply presenting a massive list of options can be paralyzing.
Information overload.
Exactly. So, good choice architecture helps structure these complex choices, maybe by breaking them down into stages, offering smart defaults, providing filtering tools, or using helpful comparisons. It's about managing complexity so you don't just give up or make a random choice.
So, these principles, defaults, expect error, feedback, mappings, structure complex choices, they're the building blocks for creating better decision environments.
Precisely.
Okay, let's see how these apply in some really important areas. How about retirement savings? We touched on defaults.
Yeah, retirement is a classic example where nudges have had a massive impact. The problem is huge. Lots of people undersave, even when they know they should save more.
That intention-action gap again.
Exactly. So automatic enrollment, using that default principle, has been incredibly successful in boosting participation rates in 401ks and similar plans.
Makes sense.
And programs like Save More Tomorrow, developed by Thaler and Shlomo Benartzi, are brilliant nudges too.
How do they work?
You sign up now to automatically increase your savings contribution rate later, usually timed with your future pay raises.
Ah, so it uses procrastination to its advantage. It feels painless now because the increase is in the future.
Yep. And it links savings increases to pay raises, so your take-home pay doesn't actually decrease, which overcomes loss aversion. It's been hugely successful in getting people to save significantly more over time. Have you looked into whether your employer offers automatic escalation for your retirement savings? That's a nudge you might be able to easily activate.
Good tip. What about actually choosing the investments? That seems super complex.
It is. And people often make mistakes chasing past performance, buying high and selling low, or putting too much in their own company's stock, which is risky.
So how can choice architecture help there?
Well, offering well-designed default investment options, like target date or life cycle funds that automatically adjust the asset mix based on your age, is a powerful nudge.
Takes the complexity out of it for people who don't want to manage it actively.
Right. And encouraging automatic rebalancing for those who do manage their own portfolio helps keep their risk level consistent. It's about simplifying and automating good practices.
And improving feedback too, right? Helping people see how their savings actually translate into future retirement income.
Definitely. Instead of just seeing a lump sum, maybe showing projections of monthly income or even visual aids like pictures of potential housing options in retirement. Making the mapping clearer.
Okay, let's switch to credit markets. Mortgages, credit cards. Sounds like another area ripe for nudges.
Oh, absolutely. Mortgages are incredibly complex, and the book points out that less sophisticated borrowers often end up paying more, maybe through higher fees or less favorable terms, especially with brokered loans.
Because the choice architecture isn't transparent.
Partly, yeah. And the complexity makes it hard to compare offers effectively. The Truth in Lending Act was supposed to help, but with so many complex loan features now, simple disclosures might not be enough.
So what kind of nudges could help you as a borrower?
Well, simplifying the types of mortgages available could make comparison easier. But on a personal level, it's about being aware of the complexity, asking tons of questions, getting advice from trusted, impartial sources if possible, and being wary of anything that seems too good to be true or too confusing to understand.
Don't just trust the lender's expert advice blindly.
Right, because their interests might not align with yours. And with credit cards, they're designed to make spending easy.
Right? Dangerously easy sometimes.
They decouple the act of spending from the immediate pain of paying with cash. Studies show people are often willing to bid more for things like event tickets when they expect to pay with a credit card versus cash.
Because it doesn't feel like real money in the moment.
Exactly. So, a self-nudge here might be consciously tracking your credit card spending, setting spending alerts, or maybe even sometimes choosing to use cash or debit for certain types of purchases to feel that pain of paying more acutely and curb impulse buys. Have you ever felt you spend more freely with a credit card?
Definitely. The bill comes later, the pain is delayed.
So awareness is the first step.
Okay, what about health? That seems like a huge area for nudges.
Huge. Think about choosing prescription drug plans like Medicare Part D in the U.S. The sheer number of options can be overwhelming.
Paralyzing.
Yeah. Studies found many seniors weren't choosing the lowest cost plan for their specific needs, potentially leaving hundreds of dollars on the table each year, simply because comparing dozens of plans across multiple dimensions is incredibly hard.
So better choice architecture could help simplify that comparison. Maybe personalized recommendations or better filtering tools.
Exactly. And then there's organ donation. This is where defaults have a massive impact globally.
Opt-in versus opt-out.
Right. Countries with presumed consent, where you're assumed to be a donor unless you actively opt out, tend to have dramatically higher donation rates than countries with explicit consent, where you have to actively sign up opt-in.
Just changing the default makes that much difference.
Huge difference, because most people probably support donation but never get around to signing the card or registry. The default carries the day.
Are there other health nudges?
Lots. Making healthy food options more visible and convenient in cafeterias or grocery stores, like we mentioned earlier. Sending reminders for checkups or vaccinations. Using social norms like telling people most patients like you take their medication as prescribed can improve adherence. Even simple things like prompts to wash hands.
Little pushes towards healthier behaviors.
Yep. And environmental protection is another area. Traditional regulations, command and control, can be effective but also costly and inflexible.
So what's the nudge approach?
Well, incentive-based systems like carbon taxes or cap and trade are essentially large-scale financial nudges making pollution more expensive. But even simpler things work.
Like,
Feedback and disclosure. The book highlights the toxic release inventory in the U.S.
what's that?
It requires companies to publicly report the amount of toxic chemicals they release. It doesn't actually ban the releases, it just makes the information public.
Naming and shaming.
Basically, yes. And it led to significant reductions in toxic emissions, just through public pressure and companies wanting to avoid being on the environmental blacklist. Providing that feedback, making pollution visible, acted as a powerful nudge.
So just making information accessible can change behavior.
Sometimes, yeah. Think about energy bills that compare your usage to your neighbors. That social comparison can nudge people to conserve.
Okay, so nudges seem applicable everywhere. Retirement, credit, health, environment, even things like school choice or filing taxes.
The book mentions improving school choice lotteries by making the system simpler and more user-friendly, like in Boston, and proposals for an automatic tax return, where the government pre-fills your return based on info they already have, which you can then approve or amend. That would be a huge simplification nudge for millions.
Takes the hassle out of it. And
Right.
can we use these ideas to nudge ourselves?
Absolutely. That's one of the most empowering takeaways. You can be your own choice architect. Use commitment devices like stick.com, or just telling a friend your goal. Set up automatic savings plans. Arrange your environment. Put the fruit bowl on the counter and the cookies in a high cupboard. Use apps that block distracting websites. Even simple things like Gmail's proposed civility check, asking, "Are you sure you want to send this?" for potentially angry emails. That's a self-nudge against regrettable communication.
Okay, but aren't there concerns? What about evil nudgers using this for manipulation?
That's a legitimate concern, and the book addresses it directly. Yes, choice architects can have their own agendas, and nudges can be used for bad ends.
So what's the safeguard?
Transparency and monitoring are crucial. The authors advocate for what they call the publicity principle, meaning nudges should generally be transparent. People should be able to find out who is nudging them and why. The method should be open to public scrutiny. They contrast visible nudges, like a sign saying drink more water, with things like subliminal advertising, which they argue against because it's non-transparent and manipulative.
So as long as we know we're being nudged, it's okay.
It's more acceptable, yes. And people should always have the ability to easily opt out of the nudge if they choose. It's about guiding choices, not eliminating them. They call it libertarian paternalism, preserving freedom of choice while still steering people towards better outcomes.
But what about the slippery slope argument? That allowing these small nudges will inevitably lead to bigger, more coercive government interventions.
They acknowledge that concern, but argue that nudging is often less intrusive than outright bans or mandates. And since choice architecture is inevitable anyway, isn't it better to design it thoughtfully to help people, rather than letting it happen randomly or be designed poorly?
Makes sense. And they also address the idea that maybe we shouldn't mess with traditions or existing ways of doing things.
Yeah, the Burkean argument that traditions often embody hidden wisdom. Their response is that sometimes traditions persist just due to inertia and status quo bias, not because they're actually optimal. We should be willing to evaluate existing choice architectures and see if they can be improved.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here. From understanding why we're not perfectly rational,
Our two systems, heuristics, biases like anchoring and loss aversion,
to the principles of good choice architecture,
defaults, feedback, mappings.
and how nudges can be applied in areas like savings, health, and even by ourselves. If you had to boil it down, what's the core message for someone listening?
I'd say it's this. By understanding a bit more about how our minds actually work, the predictable ways we err, the subtle things that influence us, we can be smarter about our own decisions. And we can also design choices, both for ourselves and for others in society, in ways that make it easier to achieve better outcomes, better health, better finances, maybe even a bit more happiness.
And it doesn't always require huge, drastic changes. Sometimes just a small nudge.
Can make a surprisingly big difference. Remember the power of defaults, or just rearranging the food in the cafeteria? Small hinges can swing big doors.
So the insights really are actionable. Listeners can actually use this stuff.
Absolutely. Reflect on the examples we talked about. Think about the choice architecture you encounter every day. Ask yourself how it might be influencing you.
And maybe try designing a nudge for yourself.
Why not? Pick one area where you consistently struggle to make the right choice. Maybe hitting the snooze button too many times, or mindlessly snacking.
Okay.
How could you redesign your environment, or set up a commitment, or change the default for yourself to make it just a little bit easier to do what your reflective system really wants?
That's a great final thought, a challenge for the listener. Consider one area and design your own nudge.
Yeah. Become your own choice architect.
Awesome. Well, this has been fascinating. We definitely encourage everyone to check out the book Nudge for even more depth. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
My pleasure.